Good morning, guys, or good afternoon, whether you're joining me from the present or the future. Welcome back to another FutureFight Vanguard video. Today, I already covered Kagero, if you guys saw that video, the FutureFight Kagero video from EB06, but today we're going to be covering the very last deck from EB06, which is the Link Joker Brant deck. This deck is pretty troll. You guys see the smile on my face because this deck is just so troll. It is kind of cheesy. The consistency is there and not there at the same time, but we'll talk about that. But I do think that it is a pretty interesting deck to use against your friends and adversaries that always check triggers against you. It is a anti-Psyqualia deck, so if your friends have Psyqualia in real life, make sure you build this deck and use it against them. But before we get right into it, make sure to check out our Cardfight Empire social medias. We have Facebook, mainly the social media that I use. I'll post updates on there from time to time. Also be sure to check out our Patreon if you guys want to get exclusive content like my deck list from winning tournaments, or you know, my thoughts on things, or even just learn how to play the game at a better level, or learn how to play the game in general. You can go check all that out down below on my link on my Patreon down in the description. But also check out our sponsors, Dabbers Cards and Games, a local-based card shop here in Georgia where they have everything latest and greatest for card game products, including when Vanguard sets drop. So if you can't buy from them in Georgia on site, definitely try to check out their link down in the description down below to buy some cards as well. But let's get right into the Brant deck. So obviously no G-Zone because duh, standard. But let's get right into the build. So a couple things I should mention about this build is that this deck plays really weird. It almost plays like Glindios, where you don't really like care about like hitting your opponent for game, because if you press them to 5, that's almost enough to like for your opponent to just be scared of game ending anyways, just because of like if they check a heal, they're dead. Also, any heal that they check pretty much turns into a crit for you. Like I had one game where I was playing this, which I didn't put into the recordings because I thought that would be too troll, but I attacked my opponent when they were at 1 damage, I attacked my opponent when I was at 2, or when they were at 2 damage, and I had already used a Brant skill against them, so I double crit them, and then they checked a heal as part of their damage checks, and then they just took an extra damage for the loss, and they were on grade 2. So this deck can be very degenerate when it wants to be, but then again, I said it can be very cheesy at the same time. It is definitely not the best deck out of the set, but it is really fun to play as well. So let's get right into it. So first we have 3 of our grade 4s, which is Wandering, Star Hulk, Deity, Brant Ringer. So Brant Ringer is a really good card. Obviously it's one of our Brants, so it has the trigger reversing ability, which is act on the Vanguard circle. You can counterboss 1, and then until the end of your opponent's turn, you change the below effects for your opponent's trigger units other than the power increase to the following. So if your opponent checks a critical, their Vanguard gets -1 critical. If they check a heal, they instead of healing, they take a damage. If they check a draw, instead of drawing a card, they discard a card. And if they check a front trigger, then the front trigger power goes to their back row instead of their front row, which helps their Excel markers like not get it and stuff. It might not affect like the 3 columns in the middle if they actually do have boosters, but it will definitely affect the cards on the Excel circles not getting front trigger. So Brant Ringer is really good, obviously way better than the grade 3 because it also affects draw trigger and front trigger, whereas the grade 3 just affects criticals and heals. It also costs only a counterblast, when the grade 3 Brant costs a counterblast and a soul blast. So talking about grade 3 Brant, let's get right into that. So we have 7 grade 3s in the deck, so altogether we run like 10 grade 3s and 4s, which is a solid number for consistency. I found that this worked for me, so it'll probably work for you as well. But Wandering, Star Hulk, Ruler, Brant, we have 4 of these, obviously for the consistency of being able to ride it. It is our first ride up to 3. The Brant Ringer is kind of just like a bonus whenever we happen upon that card, but we probably will get it off pretty early just because there are like Brant searchers in this deck. So counterblast 1, soul blast 1. When this card's on the Vanguard circle during your main phase, until the end of your opponent's turn, you change the below trigger effects to the same thing as Brent Ringer, but it only affects criticals and heals. So critical, your opponent gets -1 critical to their Vanguard, and then heal, you deal 1 damage to your opponent's Vanguard instead of them healing. So basically, this is another one of those decks where it allows you to not be so scared of your opponent's Vanguard attacking, because you can honestly just no guard their Vanguard, and if they check a crit, they won't do any damage to you at all. Like, they will go down to 0 crit, or, you know, negative crit if they check multiple crit triggers. Like, there was a time that I no guarded a waterfall and he checked double crit, so whereas normally I would have normally died, he just went down 2 crit and I didn't take any damage. So this deck can be pretty troll, but it can also save you sometimes, and it can be pretty defensive in the way that it works. Then we have 3, I won't really say backup grade 3, this card works better when it's on the rearguard circle, but we have 3 Decadal Automata. Decadal Automata. I'm just gonna say Automata. So we have 3 Automata. It has 2 rearguard abilities. The first one is a continuous rearguard ability that says this unit gets plus 10,000 power, and your opponent's Vanguard gets +1 dry. So the reason that this card helps to splash in here is because, number 1, this card gets plus 10,000 power, so it is pressure to your opponent when they don't, like, in this deck, like I said at the very beginning, your opponent doesn't want to go to 5 because then they get really scared that they're just going to end themselves with their own drive checks. So your opponent basically doesn't want to go to 5, so this helps you push them to 5, and it helps them having to guard your cards for more, because it'll be 23. And then your opponent also does get +1 drive, so when your opponent gets +1 drive, that's even more chance that they're going to check even more triggers to screw themselves over when you're on either Brant. So then its secondary ability is the trigger unit revealed by the 3rd drive check of each turn or more is put into the drop zone instead of putting into the hand, but the trigger effect activates. So what this means is that if you're playing against Gear Chronicle, that's kind of like a direct counter to them if they're using Mystery Flare, because they get 3 drive checks, but if they check a trigger on their 3rd drive check, or if you have this card out, Mystery Flare will actually get 4 drive checks. So if they check a trigger on the 3rd or 4th or 5th or however many drive checks they have, if it's the 3rd or more drive check and it's a trigger, then they have to put it directly into the drop zone, which makes them lose out on shield, which is really, really good. And then also, assuming that you have Brant active, which you probably will, their trigger will do a negative effect to them, and then on top of that, they have to discard it, so they can't even use it for the shield. So that's really, really good as well. Also, random note, but if you're using this in premium, it does work on stride as well, where you give your opponent +1 drive, and they stride, and if they hit triggers, it might reverse if you have a Brant active, and then also they would have to discard those cards to the drop zone, heal triggers, etc. for G Guardians and whatnot. So then moving on to our grade 2s, we have 12 grade 2s. We have 4 Swift Deleter Gaily to start off. So what Gaily does is Vanguard Rearguard. When it hits a Vanguard, you can Soul Blast 1, choose one of your opponent's Rearguards and bind it, and if your opponent does not have any Rearguards for you to bind, then you draw a card. So this is pretty good, keeps the early game pressure up. Obviously, if you go first and your opponent does not put any Rearguards, which is pretty likely because nowadays people just ride to grade 1 and then they swing, they don't play any other Rearguards. If they do play a Rearguard, it'll probably be like only 1. So worst case scenario, you get to bind one of their Rearguards. Best case scenario, you get to draw a card. So really good. And then its Rearguard ability only is when it's placed. If you have more Rearguards than your opponent, this unit gets plus 4,000 power. So it can really help change numbers on your columns. And then also it can hit force and everything else by itself at 14k, as long as you have more Rearguards than your opponent. Then for our next grade 2, we have 4 of the new Star Hulk grade 2, which is Star Hulk Let a Looky. But Let a Look skill is it has 2 abilities. So first one is on Rearguard. When you drive check a card with Star Hulk in its name, this unit gets plus 10,000 power. So it turns your Star Hulk cards into triggers for this unit, which is pretty cool because it's not once per turn either. So if you check 2 Star Hulk cards or a Star Hulk card and a trigger and you put the power over here, then you can also just, like, you know, have a 30k Let a Look like very easily with a booster. So that'll be like 38 swinging at your opponent, and it becomes really hard for them to guard after a while or not taking damage. Then it has a secondary ability that says when it intercepts, if you have a Vanguard with Star Hulk in its name, you can look at the top card of your opponent's deck and you may bind that card or leave it where it is. So the bonus of this card skill is that you can actually like look at the card, see if it's a trigger or not that will hurt your opponent, and then if it isn't a trigger, then you can just bind it, getting rid of that card, and if it is a trigger, you can just leave it so that it will punish your opponent, which is really good. Then we have 4 White Actor Vet. So Vet is probably the best grade 2 in this entire deck, in my opinion. It is just kind of heavy at a counter boss because we do use our counter boss every turn for Brant, so we don't want to use Vet and Brant too much at the same time. We most likely rather just use our counter boss for Brant, especially since we don't really have counter chargers in this deck. But Vet's rearguard ability is at the end of the battle that it attacked a Vanguard. If a trigger unit was not called during that battle, you can counter boss 1, draw a card, choose one of your opponent's grade 2 or greater, and bind it. So basically this card punishes your opponent for not guarding this attack with a trigger of some kind. And since triggers are their biggest amount of guard shield, then you can attack them for like a really weak attack, and then they still have to guard with a trigger or you get the skill off. So really broken grade 2 in my opinion. Then moving on to our grade 1s, we have 4 Lethal Shock Jet Shaft. Jet Shaft is really good because its rearguard ability is when it boosts, Soul Blast 1 and your opponent intercepts as much as possible until the end of the battle. So something really cool interaction is Bermuda against Melody. If they have the card that says that they can interact with or intercept with their grade 3s, they literally have to intercept with all their grade 3s when you do this card. So it wastes a lot of shield from your opponent, but it also, you know, gets the job done of getting their interceptors out of the way so that they can't use it against you or anything like that. So then moving on to our next grade 1, we have 4 Star Hulk Shiro. So Shiro, what it does is when it's placed on the rearguard circle, counter boss 1 and reveal the top 4 cards of your deck, and then you can put up to 1 grade 2 or greater card with Star Hulk in its name into your hand and put the rest into the drop zone. So while I don't like that the rest of the cards go into the drop zone, it is pretty cool because every time I use this card in the early game, most likely I get the Brant that I need, whether it be the grade 3 or the grade 4. So very consistent card and very good use of a counter blast in this deck. Then we have 3 Star Hulk Geekers. So Geekers, it has 2 abilities. First is when it's placed on, when it's on the guard circle and an attack does not hit, you can counter boss 1 and move this card to an open rear guard circle. So you can just save this card in your hand, guard it when you need it to, and then when you guard with it, you can counter boss 1 and call it to the board. So it gives you a rear guard for guarding, basically like Gold Paladin's G-Guard. Then it has an active ability on the rear guard circle that says Soul Blast 1 Star Hulk Lurley, or Lurley, which is our starter, our draw starter in the deck right here. And then you can look at the top card of your opponent's deck and you may bind that card face down or not. So kind of very similar to Let a Look, except Let a Look has to intercept, and this card can be during the main phase, which can turn out to be even better in some circumstances, which is probably why you can only do it once a game, basically, because you have to soul charge, or you have to soul blast the starter. So moving on to our grade 0s, we have 1 Star Hulk Lurley. I can't pronounce that for the life of me, but 1 Lurley because it does work with Geekers, so you don't really want to run any other starter. We run 8 V-Series crit, 4 Sentinel triggers, which is our Cosmo Wreath, and then 4 Lady Healer of the Torn World, which is our V-Series heal as well. So loading up our games here, we have, I actually typed in the name of the replay wrong. I forgot that I just put it as LJ. So for the first time in a long time during a future fight, we're going to reopen our card fight area here. There it is. Alright, so now we're going to load LJ1. So we're playing against Dark Irregular for the first game. Going to this match, I thought it would be kind of an easy matchup. So we just swing at him. We do check top 4. We get a Brant. So we already have the grade 4, so we got the grade 3 off the skill. And then our opponent attacks rearguard, checks a crit. We attack Vanguard, we check the crit, dealing 2 more damage to him. He takes a heal. Unfortunately, our Brant wasn't active at that time because we didn't have a counter blast because he attacked our rearguard. But if Brant was active, he would have taken extra damage from that heal instead of actually healing. So we rode the grade 4. He calls out a board and he's just attacking our rearguards. which eventually I was like, you know, eventually he's going to have to try to kill me, because there's no way that he gets out of this by, you know, just doing what he's doing. But fortunately for him, he had a no life king in his hand, and he also had a 5th element in the soul, so he keeps soul charging dimension creepers. So he did dimension creeper skill 4 times actually, because he's just, you know, super blessed. But he attacks into Vanguard, we take it. He puts 3 cards in, rides 5th element, and then we have to take basically like 2 really big cards, and then 5th element attack with a crit. So we PG'd, and then we just couldn't guard the last Doreen attack. So that was pretty unfortunate for us. We needed to heal, or he needed to check a heal, and he would have died from Brant Ringer's ability. But unfortunately, neither of those scenarios happened. Like I said, it is a cheesy deck, so, you know, sometimes your opponent just doesn't check what you need them to check. So this time we're playing against OTT, which is cool because it's pretty much a clan that like puts triggers on the top of their deck. However, it is a clan that can avoid putting triggers on the top of their deck at the same time. So he does check a draw trigger and a heal, which is pretty good for him. He doesn't get the heal off though. He attacks us for 16, we take it, and then he attacks our rearguard. So we go into Brant, we use the skill, we attack for 31. We do check a crit. He does get a draw trigger. Unfortunate, because that's one of the only triggers unaffected by grade 3 Brant. So he attacks our Vanguard. He gets 3 checks, and then we take a damage. It's a heal, and then we ride grade 4 Brant, counterboss 1 for the skill. We attack for 32. We do check Star Hulk, so we are able to attack our opponent. He does get a draw trigger, which makes him discard a card instead, and he re-rides into Imperial, looking at the top 2, putting 1 back. So he attacks for 35. No triggers there. And then he attacks. We use Brent's skill again. Attack for 32. We do check a heal trigger, going down and healing. And then we attack for 51 using the skill, and he had to intercept with both his cards. And then he goes into Deer here, using Deer to put 2 crits on top, to which I was like, why? Because I just no guard the Vanguard. His Vanguard goes down by crits, and I don't take a damage. So then he blocks us, we attack him, and then we attack him again. He just attacks us for 20 this time. We just use the skill to intercept. We look at the top card, we make him bind it, and he still doesn't check any triggers, so bless for him. But then we use Brent Ringer's skill again. We check a draw trigger, and he heals, but like he doesn't heal because of Brent's skill. So he what he would have 6 damage healed, he ends up not getting that because he would have had to just take another damage. So yeah, Brant's OP. Your opponent can't 6 damage heal out of it. So now we're playing against Link Joker Game 3. We're actually playing against the mirror match, which is pretty boring, honestly, but you know, it is what it is. Our opponent attacks us. Our opponent's actually running Magnetic Resonance. We're not running that card, but yeah, he is. So then we ride Galley. We use the skill of Galley to bind, and then he attacks us for 10. We take it. He can't attack, so we G-assist to get to our grade 3 Brant, because it is important. Usually I would wait a turn in standard, but it is important in this matchup that we get Brant activated as soon as possible, especially because we have the grade 4 in our hand, and we don't want those to sit without being used too long in our hand. So we do check a crit. He goes up to 5. Or sorry, he doesn't go up to 5 because he used Brant, and I forgot about we both forgot about its own skill, so he just reversed the damage. And so we checked the draw trigger that time. Draw. He rides grade 4 Brant, attacks our rear guard. He checks a crit and a crit. And then we guard his remaining rear guards. And then pretty much we use Brant skill, and we attack for 32. We should have just attacked into his Vanguard, to be honest. But we attack, he PGs, and we check a heal, so we just lose the game, even though we probably would have won because we were in a very advantageous game state. But I was literally just hoping that we didn't check a heal there, and we did. So we got gimped by the deck that we're supposed to get people with. So that has been the FutureFight for the V-EB06 Brent deck. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a thumbs up on the video. Let me know you guys enjoyed this content so that I can bring you more going forward into the future. Comment down below about what you think about the Brent deck, or did you get cheesed by it? Are you scared to check heals and whatnot? But also check out our social medias and our Patreon down below if you want Cardfight Empire exclusive content. And then also check out our sponsor, Dabbers Cards and Games, for cards as well. But with that being said, this has been Josh from Cardfight Empire, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace, guys.